So, who exactly are you? Well, my name is Richard Fish. I am an actor, writer, producer, director, engineer person. I'm an audio theater guy, and I've been coming to this workshop event since 1979, believe it or not. 1979, that's 30 years. No, it's more than 30 years, isn't it? How in the world did you ever get started, and what brings you back from year to year? Well, how I got started was because when they did the first one back in 1979, I heard that a couple of the members of the Firesign Theater were going to be there, and Fibber McGee, Jim Jordan, his real name, who played Fibber McGee on the old Fibber McGee and Molly radio show, which is one of my favorites from the old golden age. And I said, gee, I just can't miss the chance to meet these folks. So I came out to the event, and it was truly a mind-blowing experience, as we used to say, because I found enormous energy and some wonderful people, and I came home just all fired up about doing radio theater, audio theater as we call it now, and went back home to Bloomington, Indiana, which is where I live, and did a show almost immediately and started doing things back home. This event over the past 30-plus years has been one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in my whole life. So what's this event like today after 30 years? Well, we're here in West Plains, Missouri, and we are here for about a week. People have come from literally coast to coast all over the country to gather and do audio theater and learn about audio theater. It's a crazy week. Radio, 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 and no sleep is what I tell people, because there are classes and seminars and workshops on acting and writing and directing and how to do character voices or what the business is like, how to promote yourself, how to publish things, all the different aspects of the art form. And then in our spare time, quote unquote, we put together a live show in 1 week. A live show in 1 week with a group of people, many of whom have never met each other before. Auditions are the first day, and we start rehearsals right away, and then on our final night, we will do a live broadcast, a live show, 2 hours or more, with several brand new plays that have never been produced before, completely done with acting and sound effects and music and all of the elements. And it will go out on the radio, it will be streamed on the net, it will be recorded, the recordings will be available. And I don't know of any other professional conference in any field. There's lots of conferences, any field you work in, but I don't know of any other where in the course of the event you actually create the product you're talking about. And I don't mean some sort of sketchy thing, I mean a real, full-blown professional product. And that's what we do here, and that makes this event quite unique. Well, what keeps you coming back year after year? You say you've been here every year for 30 years? Well, actually, I've missed 2 in all that time. But what keeps me coming back more than anything else is the people. This field, this audio theater field, seems to attract the nicest, coolest people I've ever met in my life. All kinds of intelligent, highly creative people who are just a joy to work with and are anxious to help you and teach you. It is just a blast every year. Intense work, lots of time, lots of stuff to do. You really don't get all that much sleep sometimes, and it doesn't matter, because it is enormous good fun, and for all the effort and energy we put in it, we all come back all charged up and ready to go back into our regular lives with a whole lot more energy than we came in with. It's a phenomenon is what it is. Well, yes, but you're doing radio theater, and I mean, come on, everybody knows that radio theater sort of died when television came along. This is an antique art form, isn't it? No. And that's a misperception that we really do have constant trouble with. The art form we're talking about, we're calling it audio theater today because it's independent of its medium. When it's on the radio, it is radio theater. But this art form predates radio. It was invented well before radio broadcasting happened. And of course, it flowered greatly in the 20s, 30s, and 40s on broadcast radio when that was the big public entertainment medium. And when television came along in the late 40s and early 50s, In America, radio theater declined and eventually more or less went off the air. But the art did not die. It simply went back to its original medium of recordings. And this is the only country, the United States, is the only country where radio theater even appeared to die. All of the other countries in the world have always had some form of radio theater on the air, and people grew up with it and got used to it and were aware of it. Now, there's an old joke about what's the best time to schedule radio theater, says one program director to another, and the answer being 1945. Well, it's not true. The art in the 50s and 60s and 70s went back to recordings, and some incredibly creative people got involved. Stan Freberg did recordings in the 50s, and in the 60s there were things like The First Family, the Von Meter album satirizing the JFK administration. And then along came a group called the Firesign Theater, who had a wonderful, wonderful revelation. They started doing radio theater pieces, comedy pieces, on records, LPs. And they realized that they were not making a broadcast, they were making a recording. And people were going to hear it more than once, which meant that they could put in additional layers of jokes, references, et cetera, that you could discover on subsequent listening. And also at that time, the technology was evolving, and they could use multi-track studio technology to do things that weren't very easy to do in a live performance. And the result was quite amazing. Millions of people bought their albums and then listened to them over and over and over again and became enamored of what they were doing and realized that the audio theater medium can do some things that nobody else can do, that other mediums can't do. Oh, sure, right. I mean, come on, with CGI and all the technology in movies and television today, you're trying to tell me that this older art form can do things that these new, modern, highly technical forms can't do? Yes, it actually can. And the thing is, in audio theater, it's possible to do world-class work, no compromise, good as anybody work on a budget that is infinitesimally tiny compared to the kind of budget you need to have to do anything good on video or film or in a visual medium or even on stage. In audio theater, the lighting and the costumes and the sets and the makeup and the special effects are always Oscar-winning quality. And that is because, of course, it's all in your mind. Compared to television, for example, or the movies, in audio theater, the picture is much larger, and the colors are much brighter and better. It's really true, because it's the imagination which does it for you. Interesting point, I have read that kids who grew up in the 40s and the 30s listening to radio programs tended to be readers as adults more than children who grew up with television. Now, personally, I'm a television kid myself, and I do not remember radio shows as a boy. I discovered the whole form when I got into college, and it just enthralled me. Another thing that has happened is the talking book phenomenon, or audio book phenomenon, that was not there, really, when I was a boy. Audiobooks, yes, they're very big. Well, isn't that essentially the same thing as what you're doing here? No, not really. Audiobooks and audio theater are really two different things, because an audiobook is something that was written for the eye. It was written for the printed page, and it's somebody who's reading that into a microphone, and you can listen to it, and they're great, they're marvelous, but it's not audio theater. In audio theater, it is something which was written for the ear or adapted for the ear, specifically. And that is the real difference. Now, the audiobook phenomenon is still relatively new. Before the mid-1980s, or something like that, there was very few spoken word recordings that were out there for sale. Some great speeches and some historical things and so forth. But people did not listen to books. It just wasn't practical. The recording media wouldn't allow for that, and people didn't do it. When the medium became more practical in the late 80s and the early 90s, you had cassettes and then CDs, so you could get long amounts of material onto relatively compact storage forms. Audiobooks started to take off, and it surprised everybody. By the early years of the 21st century, the audiobook market in America was something like $2 or $3 billion a year. And audiobook publishers were beginning to include some of the other elements like sound effects and music that we use in audio theater. Still, the difference is in the writing. Audio theater is something that is written for the ear. And there are a lot of people around the world that are doing this now and enjoying it, and I'm talking about younger people in many countries. And today, with the World Wide Web, the internet, we suddenly have direct connection to people all over the world that enjoy this form. That is brand new still. That's so new, we haven't really figured out how to use it properly yet. Everybody's working on that. Yeah, well, still, all the big money is in movies and television and things like that. Audio theater seems like a small niche kind of thing, isn't it? A niche? Well, yes and no. Audio theater is part of and working into the process of creating movies and television today. I have been involved in events where we perform live a movie script. Yes, an unproduced screenplay for the movies or television, produced and performed live as audio theater in front of an audience. The response has been excellent, and the people who like it the most are the writers, because the writers will come to us after these performances and say, I finally heard my script come off the page, I suddenly realized how I could make it better, how I could develop it further, develop a character, fix a hole in the plot, something like that. And this has been done without spending a huge amount of money. Secondly, the same authors are starting to take the recordings of these performances and use them to pitch the project out in Hollywood as a sales tool. Instead of, here's my script, plop, I'll put it on the pile on your desk and you can read it and I hope you'll imagine it in the same way I did when I wrote it. No, here's a CD, listen to this, and you'll see what the value of this story is. That is relatively new, but indeed, audio theater becomes a tool for developing properties in our visual media. The whole art form is enormously fun to do. It's great fun to do. And today, the equipment you need to do it is available cheap or free to practically everybody. You don't have to be NBC Network anymore to produce world-class level audio theater. You did back in 1945, but you don't anymore. And that means the difference between one project and another is not who's got the most money or who's got the fanciest equipment. It's who's the most creative. Who's good at what they do? It's the people factor. Audio theater is a form that opens up creativity to just about everyone, anywhere. And you don't have to have huge resources to do it. That's one of the best things about it, from my point of view, because it's meant I have been able to meet such great people, all kinds of them, all ages, from all over the country, who get into this and use the audio theater form to express all kinds of creativity. It works for video games, it works for other things. Another point that just occurred to me that I'll mention. Take cartoons, for example, animation. Back in the 1940s and 50s, look at the old Warner Brother classic cartoons, and they're wonderful. they tended to be great animation, wonderful visuals, coupled with a relatively simple kind of soundtrack with boinks and whams and zots and sound effects. Now come forward to the modern era and look at a show like, say, The Simpsons, and you find a relatively simple animation, even sketchy animation, but combined with a really detailed, lifelike, audio theater-like soundtrack. And there is another whole area where the audio theater skills have moved into other areas. Same thing is happening in video games today. They're using very sophisticated production techniques, sounds, voices, and everything else to make the visuals work. So what we do here at the workshop and around the country in audio theater has enormous potential and real reverberations, if you like, in other fields, and it is the most cost-effective performance art in the world. I think we're about there.